Well, thank you very much. I'm Melanie Angelotti. I'm a faculty member that focuses on social media and digital trends at the Poynter Institute. So this is an area that I'm really interested in, and we had a great conversation in the first session, and I look forward to building on that and kind of revisiting some of those highlights from the first session here today. So how we're going to do this is each of the panelists, I'll briefly introduce them, and then they will give brief presentations with a few talking points to help us create a foundation for the conversation. And then from there, I have some questions, and then I'm sure you all do as well, and we will do our best to answer those. So let's go ahead and get started. These are our conversation leaders today. To my left here is Frank Daniels III. He is the conversations editor at the Tennessean. And next to him is Steve Yelvington, who is he works for Morris Communications, helping with audience development. And then next to him is Jay Small, who is the president of, I always forget the name of your company.
Informed Interactive, part of Evening Post Publishing.
Yes, thank you very much. And I put their Twitter handles up there. I saw Carol tweeting very heavily from the other session, so I'm looking forward to a great Twitter conversation as well, in addition to a great conversation up here. So these are some of the main talking points, some of the plan for our conversation today. These are the questions that we hope to answer, really help us to get past, or to help us understand social media more than just likes and Twitter followers, and what this really means to our news organizations and how we build engagement with our audience. The big goal is to really answer, how do we measure engagement, and how do we build strategies that help us get this audience engagement beyond just generating Facebook likes and Twitter followers, and more importantly, how can this lead to potential revenue, help us generate potential revenue as well. So, Frank, why don't you go ahead and get started? You don't have any slides, so I'll hold on to this. But go ahead and just kind of open this up with a conversation about your role as conversations editor and how you see social media playing a role at the Tennessean right now.
All right, well, clearly they heard this was the old fart panel, and they decided not to come.
No.
Or at least sit far enough away from us that we wouldn't.
No, institutional memory, all the wisdom is right here in the room. So
I have returned back into the news industry after several years in the education business, and so I've enjoyed watching and participating in the changes that have been wrought since then, although there are not as many as I would have expected, other than there are fewer of us. And my role, I write every day, and I monitor and try to foster better quality communication with our readership. And these two gentlemen are much more tuned with sort of the quantitative and the great examples of what we're doing. I'm much more interested in what's happening with social media. I'm skeptical that we're using it correctly, and I've learned a lot from these two in the previous panel, so I'm looking forward to learning how their conversation changes in this one, and enabling me to learn a bit more. But as I look at how we're using social media, I wonder whether or not it is effectively accomplishing what it is that we want to accomplish.
And then Jay, here, I'll go ahead and pass this to you.
Well, I'll just start out by saying the last panel was all lies, because you guys are the ones who showed up for this one. You're going to get the real story this time. So, I'm usually asked the question a lot because I grew up in newspapers, have spent a lot of years building interactive services for newspapers, and I still work with newspapers in our company, but I spend probably more time these days working with our local television stations and their interactive services and their businesses related to them. And so I get asked fairly often, I think it's part of the reason that they asked me to come here, how is it that local TV stations do so well, in many cases a lot better than their corresponding local newspapers, in attracting social media followings, likes on Facebook, follows on Twitter, and engagement around all of that. So I've got a few examples that I'll show you here in just a minute, but it basically comes down to a few components that I think play to the strengths of local television news organizations and local television stations as promotional vehicles. Yes, we use social media to put out incremental, incidental breaking news updates. I'll show you some examples of that. And it's kind of part and parcel of what television news does and does best. But we also use social media to solicit conversation around what we would consider talker stories. The water cooler talk. We would like to bring some of that into the context of our social media presence. We do a lot of television-style stunting. We do contests to encourage people not only to like us on Facebook, but to keep coming back to see what the next contest is going to be. We offer a lot of deals, a lot of discounts, working with our local advertisers. We offer a lot of promotions from those advertisers. And speaking of promotion, that's something that television, we all know, local television is a relentless promotion machine, and we certainly avail ourselves of promotional opportunities on air and online as well. Lower third graphics that point to our social media presence, asking questions that you can answer within the context of a social media presence. Bumpers before commercials, after commercials, 15-second spots, 30-second spots, all promoting the fact that we have a presence in social media. And it's more than just the TV station having a business page on Facebook. It's the individual journalists, it's the anchors, it's the meteorologists, it's the sportscasters, the so-called talent, the personalities. They also have individual accounts, and they frequently cross-tag each other's posts and refer to each other within the context of social media. Again, playing to the strength of local television, which is the personalities tend to be fairly well known. They tend to have personal brand and face recognition, and that plays well in social media as well. So let's move to some examples here. Here's an example, television station. This happens to be in Lexington, Kentucky. As of this morning, 88,000 likes on Facebook. This is just incidental breaking news. It's the kind of stuff that's only important maybe the next 15 minutes to an hour. It's not earth-shattering, it's not profound, it's just, hey, if you happen to be anywhere near this intersection, you might want to take note. And what you notice is that people often pipe up on some of these incidental posts and say, yeah, I was there, or I saw it, or it's since been cleared. They help us provide updates to it as well. Here's a couple of other examples of local interest stories, maybe not the same kind of incidental breaking news. And this is from Twitter. This is a couple of our stations using Twitter just to kind of get conversation started within the Twitterverse on a couple of just human interest stories that happen to have local connections. Now here's an example. I didn't want to just bring examples of things I thought we were doing okay or pretty well. Here's an example of something that I kind of wish we would not do as often as we do. And that is, you're all aware, it's something that a lot of people do not like about local broadcast television, but it's just a fact of life. We do a lot of teasing. From the first minute of a newscast, we're teasing the next 5 minutes. And then from the next 5 minutes, we're teasing the weather and the sportscast. Well, this is an example of teases to the next upcoming newscast that start on air, that are written up as a web item on our website, and then we have gone to social media to tease to the web item that teases to the next newscast. Probably not the best use of pixels and bits and bytes, but it's just so much in the DNA of television that it's kind of hard to completely put a stop to this. And though it may have some value, I think in general, I just don't like to see too much of it. Now here's an example of something you won't see a lot of newspapers do, but again, it's part of television DNA, and that is the notion that our personalities make public appearances. And we may post something in social media about those public appearances. In this case, this is I believe a meteorologist who shows up at a local school, has somebody take a picture, and they post the picture, the meteorologist and all the kids around. And this is kind of the inverse of, hey mom, I'm on TV. But it's really pretty powerful in terms of keeping people engaged once they sign on with social media. Hello.
I think put it this way. There you
Better.
go.
And here's another example of something you would expect to see from a TV station much more so than from a newspaper, and that is the idea of making you as a Facebook fan or a follower in social media feel like you're kind of on the inside as newscasts or as morning shows are being prepared. In this case, this is the morning show crew from this particular TV station in Louisiana, and they're just hamming it up on set. They're just having fun on set. They took a picture of it or grabbed a frame grab off the video and posted it. It's not something that you would see reporters in your newsrooms very likely to do within your social media stream. But remember, these are known faces, known names in the community, and they are playing to that fact and making you feel like, hey, you might even, you feel closer to having a personal relationship with them. Then I mentioned that we do a lot of contests, a lot of promotions to try to encourage people to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Especially we do this on Facebook. But then we also do contests fairly continuously. Some of these are co-sponsored contests, so that we do trade-outs for prizes and things like that, which also helps us in terms of monetizing social media. But the idea here is we try to do contests, giveaways, deals, discounts, and offers that will be of interest to people who have already followed us in social media, and then also will encourage new people to begin to follow us. Here's just a couple of examples. Here's one from our station in San Luis Obispo, California, that is about kayaking. That's an offer that's relevant within that local community. It's a popular activity there. And again, I wanted to show a couple of examples of things that we do that maybe I would not want to do as much of. And that is television stations are, especially if they have a broadcast affiliation with a network, they are compelled and feel compelled to provide a lot of promotion to the network programming. In this case, they've let the whole top of screen image on this particular Facebook page turned it over to The Voice, an NBC show. And if you're an NBC affiliate in this day and age, you know that NBC needs all the help it can get. Still, I'm not sure that this is the best way that our station in California could use this kind of prime real estate within their social media presence. Nevertheless, it happens, and we accept it. Now, here's an example, that same TV station using social media to solicit potential interview candidates for a story they're preparing. And I see newspapers and TV stations doing this. I think it's actually a pretty good activity. A lot of times you'll see it happen when there is some law or some regulation or some local ordinance that's getting ready to change, or some way of institutional business that's getting ready to change, and you're looking for people who will be affected by the change to do kind of a human interest impact story. This is a good way to solicit examples that will help round out a story. And I've got one more here, I think. This way, that way, there we go. This is the only example I brought from one of our newspapers. This happens to be our flagship paper in Charleston, South Carolina. And this is just to show that newspapers are doing a lot of these same things, maybe just in slightly different ways. In this case, here's another example of putting up a talker topic. The newspaper had a story about it, they have the same story online, and they're trying to get some conversation started about this topic. They've added a nice photo that kind of goes along with the topic. They've done a good job of asking sort of an open-ended question that will get some conversation going. So, I mean, the idea of being the agenda setter for social media conversation is certainly not exclusive to television stations. I see a lot of newspapers doing that really, really well. And I think that's my last little piece, and I get to hand the baton over to my friend here.
Okay, good. That's me. Jay just talked about some things that TV stations are doing right, and but also some things that TV stations are doing wrong. But I left the newspaper-based industry for a brief period about a dozen years ago and worked for Cox Interactive. And you may think of Cox as a newspaper company, but it's not. It's a broadcast cable company that happens to own a couple of newspapers that some of whom they're trying to get rid of. What I learned there is that broadcasting has an awesome promotional firepower, and that promotion and marketing is baked into their DNA, and that is an immense advantage You guys as newsroom managers are not typically engaged in marketing what you do. You're engaged in running what you do. And we are at Morris in the process of doing a lot of reorganization at our newspapers. We have this new position called Vice President of Audience with a pretty broad scope. And this diagram here shows some areas of responsibility the typical newsroom manager does not have. News is part of it, opinion is part of it, of course. Production of products is part of it. You know, the people who do your pagination and make the micro level news judgments, but marketing. Social is on there, community and social, as well as opinion and editorial. I actually pull those closer together, but this is a pretty broad set of responsibilities. Alan English, whom I think most of you know, is floating around the back here, is VP of Audience for the Augusta Chronicle now and has a very different scope of responsibility than he used to have. And all these things have to function together, and when you're looking at the use of social media, a lot of this is about marketing, it is about promotion, it is about getting people into a relationship with you as a business and onto your website and into your circle of audience. But a lot of it is not. A lot of it is about engaging with the community and doing journalism in a different kind of way than you used to do it. I've been doing this online thing for a long, long time. I left print in 1994 and moved to the digital side in Minneapolis, but I was fooling around with online stuff. I ran a bulletin board, a dial-up bulletin board in the 80s. And I really cut my teeth on networking as a conversational kind of experience. You know, the baby duck syndrome, the first thing the baby duck sees is, are you my mother? Well, to me, my mother really is the community conversation, not a publishing channel. And that is what has propelled the growth of the internet. It is what people do online. It's where people spend their time. They're not spending their time reading your stuff. They're spending their time on Facebook having conversations. So in the earlier session, Frank asked, you know, is this stuff good for us? It doesn't look like it's good for the newspaper. And it isn't. And if you frame your world as that of the newspaper, you will lose. If you reframe the conversation as something broader about what happens in print, what happens on your website, what happens on Facebook that is community driven, that involves people in the community experiencing a conversation about life here, you really broaden your circle, then it's a whole different kind of conversation, and it fits into more than one of these boxes here. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about internal stuff as well as external, the social networking, the conversations that unfold on Twitter and Facebook, but also what we're doing on our websites. These are all tied together. The conversations, the story commenting, forums, all that kind of thing, these are all a continuum. They're not separate. They're integrated. They need to be integrated into jobs at every level, and by that I mean that reporters need to be engaged, not just fire and forget. You know, I report, I write, and then I turn my back on the story, because that story's arc continues through the conversation and the community's interaction and the fact that 3 people noticed the mistake you made today. And you have to be there engaged in that. It was hard enough. Frank said something that I thought was really powerful, because you were like you're probably the first person to ever put news on the web.
Yes, I am that old.
You are that old. And then you left, and then now upon returning, you're saying, we didn't do very much. We didn't accomplish very much. And I think that's really right. We did not grasp the centrality of the interaction to the entire thing we're still publishing like it's 1999, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not. And now suddenly we've got both internal conversations about the same story. You know, this is the net case out in Texas who said Obama's going to invade with UN troops and take away your guns. County judge. Big conversation on Facebook. Big conversation on stories in both Amarillo and Lubbock. And we have to be engaged in all of these environments. You can't walk away from any of them. There we go. This is a forum-like experience in Athens that we've built. It's a huge conversation center for the community, not just conversing on the bottoms of stories. It's conversing about everything, and it's driving a significant slice of traffic on that website. So things we can talk about today, you know, rules of behavior, rules of engagement, what you need to do and what you shouldn't do if you're a reporter, if you're an editor, where you need to be and where you need to stop, identity, anonymity, shared goals. Why are we doing this, and does the community buy into that social contract? If they do not buy, if you don't have a social contract with your audience, if they don't know why you have commenting, and what your goals are, if you don't know why you have commenting and what your goals are, it's going to go south on you real fast. I'm a big user of sites like TripAdvisor, and TripAdvisor's conversations are almost never negative because they have a purpose. Well, what's your purpose? Why do you do any of this stuff? And if you don't talk about your purpose, you can't expect people to share it. And then a lot about measurements. How many of you have Chartbeat? One in this room. Oh, two, three. You all know about web metrics, or you should know about tools like Omniture and Web Trends and so on, and you should be looking at those numbers and you should be thinking about what they're telling you. Chartbeat is different. It's a tool that we use a lot. It's real time, what people are looking at right this minute on the website. So this is, 1,400 and something people looking at Jacksonville.com. I don't remember what time of the day I snapshotted this. And you can see what they're looking at. And there's a list of the top items. There's a lot of long tail. There's only 118 people looking at customer kills gunman during armed robbery. But you need to be looking at what people are doing and how they're responding to individual items, and think about how they're getting to that stuff, because those little blue dots there, I think 8% of the audience for that number, that customer kills gunman story, 8% of that audience at that moment was coming from Facebook. Later in the day, that might be 60%. Particularly in the afternoon or in the evening when people really hit Facebook. The little colored bars show you how many are coming in from search, how many are coming in from links from, freerepublic.com. Good God. I don't want to even think about that one. 13 people. Fantasyguns.com. Yeah, that's not going to be good.
Guru.
Oh, okay.
Fantasy Guru. It was
Guru.
about the Rashad Jennings story.
Okay, that's better.
Okay.
I'm not going to freak out about that. But the colored bars, links, social, search, direct, internal navigation. Learning to understand in real time how people are responding to what you're doing. This is a great tool for that. So we monitor that. We have this on a display, and I think just about all of our newsrooms on a big display panel. Big culture changer. Makes people hyper aware. You've got that up on the wall, right?
No, they won't let me buy a big screen just yet. I'm working on it though.
Steve,
Capital.
come on, help him out with that.
They're really cheap now.
eBay.
eBay, trade out. But these tools and measurement, getting this engaged and part of your internal culture, your processes, measurement. People, you all know that you can't manage what you can't measure. putting a scoreboard up like this is not just measurement, it's also incentive. People start wanting to run these numbers up and down.
But
They have them on their tabs in there.
Yeah.
I know you have a couple more slides, but I want to just touch on metrics, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. And you know, we get so many analytics. We find out about our Facebook friends and our likes and our Twitter followers, but when we're just looking at those numbers independently of our goals and what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, they really lack the context and meaning to really see how we are achieving our bigger content goals, like developing relationships with our audience, helping our communities think more critically about the issues affecting it. So what advice can you give about taking these metrics and using them effectively to tie them in with your goals?
The biggest thing is you need to know what your goals are, and that isn't as simple as saying, well, I want to double my engagement this year. It's understanding what problem you're trying to solve. The problem that we're trying to solve is that we have an awesome reach. We have a really broad audience when you look at monthly CUMEs. Everybody in town comes to the website once or twice, and you can't build a business on that. Mm-hmm. So if you were to graph the engagement, you've got a huge audience that comes once or twice, and then it just goes like that. It disappears and kind of flattens out until you get way over the right side of the graph. You start looking at people who are coming 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 times. And there's a little audience over there that's cumulatively accounting for about 45% of your traffic. And the goal is to grow the size of that audience because that's what is really deliverable to advertisers. Well, when you put it in that context, that's a different conversation than, well, I need more Facebook likes. So my goal is to get deeper engagement with my digital products where my advertising is. It's not just about my Facebook footprint, it's about the effectiveness of that campaign and getting people into my website more than once a month.
Jay, you do a lot of work with creating campaigns and strategies that do help to get this more sincere engagement. Right. What advice or suggestions would you have?
Well, as we were having this conversation last time around, one of the things I said is something that I talk about a lot within our company, and that is that, quantity of activity will pretty consistently breed more quantity of activity. But quality of activity will not necessarily always breed more quality of activity. So if your goal is, if you're measuring social media success, as Steve was suggesting, on the number of likes you have, and I go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is a lot of people ask me, how do you get so many likes? It's through promotion, it's through stunts, it's through small ball, it's not particularly strategic, it's not particularly elegant. But the bigger question is, how do you keep the ones you have, and how do you keep them coming back? Because as you all know who have any kind of social media accounts personally, it's pretty easy these days to hide information you get from your social media connections from appearing in your news feed, or by not acting on it routinely. Even if you don't take the action of hiding, you will wind up, if users are not routinely engaging with us, then our content in their news feed will begin to be sorted down in a way that they don't always even see it. So I think the challenge is really, it's easy to measure the quantitative stuff. And it's easy to start changing the behaviors of your news organizations based on the measurements that you choose to put out there. It's much harder to measure the qualitative stuff, except in anecdotes. Your editors, news directors, journalists kind of sense when they have started a conversation and when they've participated in it and when it has generated some high quality information that they can take back into developments in that story, that they can take back into the other products. They can take them back to the web, they can take them back to the newspaper, back to the TV newscast. And that's really where the reward is in social media as it relates to our news product and our news brand. It is difficult today to measure it, and I think it will be difficult indefinitely to measure that because it is purely qualitative.
Even some of the things that are quantitative we miss and they drop on the floor. Chartbeat's going to tell me how effective I am this afternoon in driving traffic to my website. That's really important. But what it doesn't tell me, and Facebook really doesn't give me any easy tools to measure, is when I'm putting these items on Facebook, am I getting crickets, or am I getting 65 follow-up notes in a conversation underneath them? And if it's the latter, then it's, as Jay says, it's going to feed back into their sorting algorithm. It's going to change the effectiveness of everything I do going forward, and I don't have a metric that tells me that.
Well, Frank, we were talking about this a little bit during the break, and it kind of goes to the point that we were talking about earlier, is that before we're so used to publishing a story and then washing our hands of it and moving on to the next story. And with social media, publication is closer to the first step rather than the last step in our publication process. So you were telling me that typically you get, what, 30 or so, at least 30 emails from readers on a daily basis. So can you talk a little bit about, that kind of fits in with what we're talking about, the qualitative rather than the quantitative feedback that you're getting from your audience, and how does that affect the work that you do and the engagement you have with your audience?
It's a great question. What I would say is that the publication is sort of the middle part, and then they each build on each other. We talked about this earlier, which is if we're going to use social media, then we have to be fully engaged in social media. That reporters don't just tweet out that they've done a story or tweet out something that's going on in the meeting they're covering. They then have to engage the other members of the Twitterverse. They have to engage people on their Facebook or that are commenting on their stories. And I think that it's very easy for reporters to get busy. But what really I think that we've not changed at all as an industry. We're nervous about criticism. We're nervous about putting ourselves in a position where something we may say or do will be taken the wrong way. And I mean, I think that's very interesting about what the TV personalities do. I would say it's probably because most of what they say is innocuous, but that's probably an editorial comment.
Likely.
If we're going to deal with our credibility gap, if we're going to deal with using the social verse to move people on that curve to the I come to the site every day, we're going to have to do things that we didn't do before. To Steve's earlier point, I mean, the internet, digital media is all about the interaction, and we've got this opportunity to engage people about our stories, about the things we're covering, and email was I think the first way to do it. Before people would send us a letter to the editor, it was they threw us a blast. We either printed it or didn't print it. Now we can begin to have conversations via email or whatever. And what I find is I go on and look at my comments. When I make a mistake, which is too often, I will first correct it in the comments section of my story. I will just say, reader emailed me, somebody got in touch with me, and I made this mistake. Sorry, it's corrected in the story now, and move on. And I think that those kinds of activities are helping me understand what the value of social media is, because it's different than what I thought it was when I got into the newsroom in February.
And what was that?
It was a waste of time. I don't use Facebook. My family does, and I only use Facebook to stalk my family. And I would imagine that's a pretty significant number of it. But I use it more and more, mainly because Facebook is how you comment. And so I do engage readers on Facebook now. I still prefer email, but that's just because I'm old. But that engagement, whether it's email, whether it's Facebook, email is a social medium in my mind. And we ought not to forget the old social media as we're looking at the new.
But you know what the process that you're describing is one where you become less the faceless institution, the big granite color building down on Broadway, and instead you are a human being, a person. There's been tons of research for years that shows local TV outpointing the newspaper in believability and trust. And we, as people from the print world, look at that. Oh my God, those people can't spell. How can you trust anything they do? But it's because they have that human. They project a human face. Yes. And
they can pretend to be human.
This is an opportunity for print, historically print media. Careful how I say that.
Yes.
To play in that space and play very effectively.
I agree. And you see it, the Tennessean does a great job of using all these technologies. They have pretty much everything you guys talked about. There is some version, polling, interaction. I'm very impressed. But what I don't see is where that real engagement is. Where is that? Because I was reading something last night, and the word trialogue came up, right? It was a dialogue between three people, and as you were talking, I was going, what we really need to figure out is a multi-log. How are we creating a multi-log with our readers? Because it's me talking with our readers talking with themselves, and what kind of multi-log are we going to create around each thing that we do? Because a story is its own publication. It has a life that is different than the life it used to have. And trying to figure out ways that we use the social verse to create a multi-log is intriguing to me.
And elements of this conversation that we're having right now that we also had in the last hour could have been applied 10 years ago to the emergence of blogging and story comments, could have been applied 20 years ago on commercial online services, or back when Steve was running his BBS, it could have been applied to any place where networked conversation includes agenda setters, which is the role that I think we aspire to, and everyone else participating in some form. So it's there. I think one of the hallway conversations we had, kind of coming back to the idea that things maybe really haven't changed as much as we liked. But the important takeaway is it still comes back to, are we willing to submit to being part of the conversation instead of putting something out there and then returning to being the neutral observers and moving on to the next thing we choose to cover. Yeah.
Well, I have an observation and a question, and I also, if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Something that Frank said, and then Jay kind of followed up on, this changing role of the journalist, or journalism, I think, to say it more accurately. You were saying that you use Facebook to stalk your family. But
ineffectively, I must add.
I mean, I think we all do. And I kind of see it as a comparison to, in addition to reading, listening to NPR, reading the daily newspaper, I also look at my Facebook newsfeed because that's information that's relevant to me. And, my friends and my followers, they are making the editorial decisions that front page editors used to be making about what was on page one is the same as what I'm seeing on my news feed. So we're seeing this transition where our editors, our publishers aren't necessarily making the decisions about what the audiences are seeing. The audience is choosing itself. However, journalism organizations and more generally just people in general are helping guide other people in the audience to the good stories, to the relevant information. So in the past, I might see birth announcements in the newspaper, and now I see baby book, pictures of babies all over Facebook, or I might get marriage announcements, and I'm seeing marriage pictures, wedding pictures all over Facebook. So that's kind of the observation, and the question is, how is this changing role for journalism? How can we effectively harness that as news organizations to use social media more effectively? And then the follow-up question will be about revenue. So I'll start off there, though.
I don't think that the internet and social media are. We're not seeing different new behaviors. What we're seeing is the behaviors that have always been there revealed in ways that we couldn't see before. I mean, always people would turn to letters to the editor or to my column or to the sports page or to the obits. I mean, they would choose how they organized the newspaper in ways that we never got to see. Now we get to see that, and we get to see. Now we get to be part. We get to witness some of the water cooler conversation. Before the water cooler conversation happened, we didn't witness it. Now we can witness it. Now we can measure it. So I don't know that we know what that's telling us today. You know, that's part of what you guys are, I think, very forcefully underlining, which is that we need to get smarter about what we're watching and incorporate that. I think we're just revealing the things that people have done, and now we can be a part of that conversation. So when the water cooler conversation happens, we can actually throw in as somebody around the water cooler. You know, they're talking about my story, I can jump in. I think those are some very fascinating, revelatory aspects of the ability that we are spying on people all the time.
Engaging with people all the time.
That too.
You know, what this is for me is that one-way journalism was a temporary condition, and it's over with. And if you get your head wrapped around that, and you get everybody in the organization wrapped around that, it changes everything about what you do. And to Frank's point, it was a bit of an illusion to begin with.
And do you think news organizations are doing that effectively?
No.
How could they be more effective, I guess would be a more productive way of asking that question.
It's this word engagement, we keep throwing it around, and we don't really define it because it means different things in different contexts. But of course we want people to comment, but we need to be in the conversation, adding value to the conversation, leading, correcting, not arguing. That doesn't work, but participating in these conversations, because this is part of how the processing of the information is how people really soak it up. It's like digestion, you know, and it's an important part of the process that we have to be involved in.
Digestion, not indigestion, right?
Well, and you know, the other thing you have to keep in mind is the conversation around news topics will make our news reports better if we're listening and if we're participating. There are fewer of us now than there were in the past. There are fewer steps in the editorial process. And this is another area where television news approaches all of this very, very differently, because television journalists are accustomed to being generally unfiltered. So yeah, their spelling is atrocious, and they're still going to be inclined to type things out as a pronouncer instead of you know, as the correct spelling. Fine, you just kind of grind your teeth and move on with that. But they are very accustomed, and they're also accustomed to things. It kind of goes back to Frank saying, you know, they can at least create the appearance that they're human. They make personal appearances. They sit there and press the flesh. Newspaper journalists. Maybe the editor, the senior editor of the newspaper makes, you know, is at the Kiwanis or the Rotary. But as far as just pressing the flesh, you know, hanging out at the state fair because people know you and want to know you personally. So carrying that into social media is, again, more in television DNA than it is in newspaper DNA. I'm not saying it's always right. I'm not saying what they say and how they engage is always appropriate. But they're not afraid to do it. They're not afraid to try things. Let it be rough. Let it be raw. And it turns out to make their news reports better and to make people more engaged with what they're saying on air and on the web too.
Well, I think that's a really great point. That something that print journalists can learn from TV, and I think that social media has inspired to a certain extent with tweet ups or meetups. You know, we're dedicating this whole day to social media and these conversations to social media, but the truth is that's still such a small segment of our audience. I think the Pew research that just came out, I think it's in the teens of people who are engaging on Twitter right now. But it's an important audience because they're invested in us. However, we have this large segment of our in-person audience that we still need to find ways to engage with and bridge that with our online audience. And so I've heard of examples at the Columbus Dispatch. I know that they did breakfast with the community, invited people to have coffee and donuts with the reporters and editors. A lot of news organizations have been doing tweet-ups and as ways to give their journalists faces and building those relationships to go from just taking Twitter followers to actual, that the 40% of people who are addicted to our products. So finding ways to build that engagement, not just using Twitter, using Facebook, using social media, but finding ways to sincerely show that we're invested in the community.
Well, one of the first things you've got to do in all that process, and I might joke about the quality of some of the comments that come to our site, but if you can't treat every single person that is engaging with you with respect and feedback in a very measured way, don't react emotionally to what they're saying, you're going to fail. And it's so easy when people criticize us to bow up and react negatively. And I do it every single time, but I don't do it except for internally. And when we respond back, if we respond in measured tones and acknowledge that people are engaging with us because they're passionate, and then begin to use that passion to first blunt their often inappropriate criticism, and then enable them to say to somebody else, these people, I don't agree with them, but they listen. I think that's an opportunity that we have with these technologies that we're not taking full advantage of.
Do we have any questions in the audience? Okay.
Thanks. Okay.
Go ahead and say your name.
I'm Leon Tucker. I'm the managing editor at the Courier Post in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Thanks, guys. We're talking about metrics, and we're also talking about how to reach the folks that we want to engage. Are you all using metrics to sort of figure your way out about how to reach people, particularly what time of day and in what way does metrics figure into this question?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's easy to see with simple web tools where your existing traffic patterns are and when people are coming to your website. What you don't see from web analytics is where how people are coming from to your website and how that changes over time. And one of the cool things that I've gotten out of Chartbeat is a very powerful picture of how that shifts during the day. Facebook is really big in the evening. Well, most of your websites are sitting there idle because people have been trained to think of you as the morning newspaper. So you have a chance to shift that traffic pattern by tapping into that and really focusing your Facebook initiatives on that evening usage behavior pattern that's out there and amplifying it. We're talking at our Amarillo newspaper is talking about taking the social media person there and moving her schedule so that she's working Sunday through Thursday because Sunday is such a big Facebook day. And the website's dead on Sunday. People are not using our websites on the weekends. They're off on Facebook. They check the website first thing Monday morning. But we want to punch up that Sunday engagement and knowing how to engage around the great journalism that you've prepared for your Sunday paper and the stuff that isn't great journalism, the games, the polls, asking people to participate in a conversation. Did you see that? What do you think of it? That kind of thing.
And Steve,
the metrics can lead us down that road.
I put up your newspaper report here.
Yeah. We report. We've built an audience dashboard. This isn't the report. This is the legend that explains what all these things are. And I just highlighted that one of the things that we count, we don't count Twitter. Twitter's really important, but Facebook is an order of magnitude more important. So we're reporting monthly on Facebook footprint, the percentage of what's the language in here? It's referrals per fan, total referrals, and Facebook market share of the market that Facebook has in your community, of Facebook's gross footprint. How much of that are you engaging with? And they have tools in Facebook that'll tell you that. Well, we report on this for every one of our local media operating units every month, and they all share the data and they look at how each other are doing, and it creates a little competitive and conversation.
Jay, I know this is something that you pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, and one of the things that we touched on in the last hour that I think is an important thing to look at is Steve observed that Facebook has become the number 3 referrer to behind direct traffic, which is somebody typed in your address or typed in or bookmarked you and then got to you that way, and then search behind that, and then Facebook being number 3. For many broadcast websites, not just ours, Facebook, social media in general, have become the second largest referrer of traffic, regardless of time of day or day of the week, behind direct traffic. And that's an important change. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, television station websites do not have the duration typically or depth of archive content that a typical newspaper.com has. You have more stories posted per day. You tend to keep them on the website permalinked for a longer period of time. That means a certain amount of your traffic in search is going to be coming to your back catalog of articles, your archived content. Not that there's anything wrong with the long tail, just that if you think about the traffic that's going to be coming to your sites from social media referrals, that is far, far more likely to be coming to content that is current, as in last 24 hours, is far more likely than something that occurred last year. And I think that's the kind of content that, because it's what's happening right now on your site, that's also going to be the adjacencies that are friendliest to advertisers. So in a way, that's an indirect revenue benefit of social media growth. So we tend to look at metrics that way as well.
I want to get more to the revenue question, but we have a question here in the back.
Yes, I wanted to piggyback on Leon's question about metrics with respect to likes on Facebook. Can you talk about the importance of likes versus engagements? A lot of newspapers are racing to see how many folks can like them. Is that what we should be focusing on?
I don't think it's what you should be focusing on, but it's one of the things that you need to monitor. The stream that people experience when they go to Facebook is personalized. And it's personalized by an obscure and ever-changing algorithm. We don't know what factors are weighed at any given time. They tinker with it, they mess with it. But we do know that likes is one of those things. Other kinds of engagement, commenting, sharing, all those things will get put into a score that governs whether and how well your future stuff shows up in that individual stream. So yeah, it's an important thing. It's a good thing. Being liked is a good thing, but it's not as important as shares, and it's certainly not as important as click-throughs, which they do monitor. They know that you click through to a URL, and that's an engagement factor they monitor. I
equate the like to the first kiss at the end of a decent first date. It's not a commitment to marriage, but it is I'm willing to go to the next step with you. I'm going to see what kind of stuff you put in my news feed, and if I engage with that stuff, then chances are future things that you put in my news feed are going to show up for me. But understand that Facebook has all kinds of algorithms that determine, for people who don't sort by time, a lot of us in news tend to like to sort by time, but most people do not change the sort that Facebook provides them, which will play up likes that they have engaged with more often. So if you got the like and then didn't give them content, a second and third date that was just as satisfying, then you're going to start moving down the lists. It's like the Seinfeld episode where he was concerned about where he was on his girlfriend's speed dial. You're going to move down the speed dial list, and eventually you're not going to show up at all. Even though you've got that like, it's essentially worthless to you.
Yeah, the corollary to that would be, how did you get the like? If you're getting the like through promotions and sort of one-off opportunities,
Giving away an iPad.
yeah,
I hate that.
That's where you get that initial rush of excitement, and then that's a useless like.
Yeah.
So we have one.
Give away a Harley.
We have time for another question.
I'm wondering if you're doing any training or have any advice on how to write what you put on your social media to increase the engagement. You pointed out that just promoting what's coming up is not the way to do it. But are you spending efforts to teach the people who are doing posting on social media how to do it?
That's a great question.
I can start with this, and then there's this thing called social media optimization. We hear about search engine optimization, but for social media, taking cues from how your audience engages. So a lot of the times it's making your headlines more conversational, kind of using them as conversation starters, or helping them to see what question that audience or that article is going to answer. So ask the question, put the link to the story, then that kind of teases it a little bit, but also sets them up for what they're going to be getting out of the article. Hashtags, keeping track of the conversation. Any way you can add context or help them, help create some quality content that's worth sharing and worth having a conversation about.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of training by example, because we've got newspapers and TV stations out there trying all kinds of different approaches to agenda setting posts in social media. And so we try to, I'm a corporate weasel, so we do a lot by webinar, but we tend to put up a lot of examples and say, this one, look at the conversation this one generated, versus something that maybe is on it, because we do have similar news topics that we may have the opportunity to cover across our markets. So we try to make it as example-based as we can, because this is still, though the idea of social interaction is certainly not new, the idea of social interaction in these formats has evolved quite a bit, and it's still relatively new to a lot of our staff. So we try to make it very visual, very example-based and anecdotal, in absence of effective qualitative measurements of that content that we're providing.
This is our final question.
Okay, final question here.
How many of you charge for content? Okay, the question is, the double-edged sword, the elephant in the room, is people that can access your content that you're trying to charge for through social media. Are you concerned about that? And if so, what are you doing to address that?
Concerned about it in that we think it's a bad thing? Absolutely not. The problem we have is that the engaged audience is way, way, way too small. And if we want to make money off that audience, we better grow it. So it's good that people come in from social media. I'm not crazy about the general idea that Facebook has become the new front page, but it is what it is. Didn't invent it, it's there. So we better use that front page to draw people into our circle and hopefully make them into such powerful friends that they want to pay.
And make it be such a successful first kiss that they want to marry us.
And,
That's right.
And to go back to your
Real good kisser.
Despite looks.
and to go back to your earlier question, there are some interesting applications coming out where you can follow users from your website out into their socialverse, and so that you can begin to understand their behavior, and that would then make all the social access of your website more important to you, because you're going to be able to have that conversation with advertisers about how that engagement on our website is beneficial to people as they go out into the rest of their world.
Yeah, let me also say that reader revenue is an important opportunity that we're all going to pursue, but it's the smaller opportunity. We cannot lose sight of the fact that the big business is the marketing business, it's the advertising business, it's the targeted marketing business, and while we are asking people to pay for the journalism, we really need to be on top of developing other products and other parts of our websites that are completely open and free. We cannot lose the gross numbers just because we're putting
That's right.
a gate in front of things.
We talked about the money question in the last hour, and I would just I'd want to leave on a point that we made last time, which was, the sum of our news product in print, on the air, on the web, and now in various social media. And this might either be a liberating thought for you, or you might consider it an insult. I hope you won't consider it an insult. The sum of that product is our ante to play as a provider of marketing solutions in our communities. So worry less about whether we are making money from our Facebook news feeds, the content that we're putting out there, the conversation we're engaging in. Worry more about whether your sales teams have the digital marketing solutions in whole to help businesses with their own social media presence. Because what we've done is established that we're trying all kinds of things within interactive services, websites, social media. We're players. We have experience at this. Your sales team should be able to carry that experience to their clients and to their prospects, particularly small and medium businesses in your communities, and your brand will open that door, even if they're not traditional advertisers, and will at least get the conversation started about offering them marketing services that may or may not have a whole lot to do with adjacency to the content that we produce every day.
I think that's a great note to end on, and it's perfect because we are out of time as well. So thank you so much to Jay, Steve, Frank. Great conversations this morning. In the nature of social media, we can continue these conversations on Facebook and Twitter too. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.